So week to week, we talk money and we talk investing so that we can put our minds at ease and know that there is a tactic and a way of moving forward so that we can retire on our own terms. And who does this for us? We have Darren Farwell of the Farwell Group. And he's with us this morning and promised a happy story. So good morning, Darren.
Good morning, Marilyn. And you're right. I was in last week, and last week we had a story not particularly happy because, I relayed a story of a woman who was really caught totally by surprise when her husband passed away suddenly. Well, the fact that he passed away suddenly certainly would be reason for being surprised by it. But unfortunately, because there wasn't any planning in advance, when the time came, what she found was she didn't have access to her credit cards. She didn't have access to bank accounts. And even more troublesome was that his business had been running into trouble just around this time, and there was some question about whether or not the creditors would be able to go after his joint interest in the family home. So there were lots of potential problems here simply because there wasn't any planning in advance. And it's not that it was her fault. It wasn't her husband's fault. However, it was the fault of not planning ahead. So I do say to listeners, or from a woman's perspective listeners, whether you're a couple, whether you're single, consider that old maximum: plan for the best, but be prepared for the worst. Now, this morning, we're going to visit the opposite end of the spectrum. Ron had been in palliative care for some time, so he and his wife, Joanne, certainly knew what the end of the road was going to be for him. Just was a question of when. And so they did have time to prepare, and in fact, they did prepare. So when Ron did pass away, there was a lot less stress for his wife, Joanne, who was his executor, and his kids, of course. But there was no getting around the stress of loss and grieving. That's quite normal. But having the time and space to deal with that part of grieving rather than the stress of paperwork and documentation and bureaucracy, that's what they had done. They removed that stress by preparing it ahead. And here's how they did it. It wasn't particularly complicated. It's rather simple, in fact, but powerful in its simplicity. They had completed what's called a financial inventory. Now, a financial inventory in the manner that we're discussing it isn't just a list of where your different assets are, although that's an important part of it. There are other very important parts to the financial inventory for your beneficiaries, for your loved ones after you've passed away. For example, in their financial inventory, they had a list of who their accountant was and contact information, who their lawyers were and their contact information, who the financial advisors and bankers were and their contact information. Of course, any other important people in your lives, part of your team, should also be in that financial inventory. There was also a list of what regular bills were being paid. How were they being paid? Were they being paid charged to the credit card? Were they automatic debits out of the checking account? How much were they? There was a lot of detail in terms of what was going on with the regular bills. Credit cards, there were a copy of statements. There was an indication of how the credit cards were paid and when. Then we get into some of the stuff you don't think about right away, but so critically important. All the computer passwords. In fact, what they had done is they'd set up an application where both of them had access to the application so that if something happened to one of them, they would have a listing of all the passwords for all of the different applications that we all have these days in our lives of social media and applications on our cell phones. Speaking of social media, they had a list of all their sign-ins and email addresses for the different social media accounts. There were 3 years of copied tax returns. There were birth certificate copies of passports. The marriage license was there. Really important to have the marriage license when it comes to getting some of the documents you're going to need to execute the will. There was a list of insurance policies, investment statements, banking information, and Joanne had set up her own credit card and her own banking account. Now, I know it sounds like a lot of stuff, and that's why preparation in advance is important. It's going to take some time to put a big financial inventory like this in place, but when you do that and when it's done, it's well worthwhile, because also in that inventory was also a wish list. If something were to happen to either of them, what kind of funeral arrangements would they like? What kind of care would they like? All of those things were written out in this financial inventory. And importantly, it was set up so that those who would need to know could know where to go to get it. You know, it's one thing to have set up this financial inventory, but if no one knows it exists, then it's not going to be that useful. So it's also important to let people know where you're keeping the financial inventory so they can go get it if necessary. So Ron and Joanne had the time, and they used the time to make sure things were well explained. Now, most of us, a matter of fact, have the time, especially if we start now. So reduce the stress of bureaucracy administration for your loved ones at a time that's already going to be stressful by doing this kind of full financial inventory. Now, as it turns out, of course, because we have a lot of resources specially created for those people who have lost a loved one or potentially might, is that we have a financial inventory that you can fill out and have all this documentation and information available. What we do find as well is many of the people who get this find it a kind of a daunting task. We can also help you work through it. So if someone would like a copy of the financial inventory, feel free to send an email, give us a call, and we'll forward that on to you.
So a financial inventory would help put all that chaos in order, and you'd be doing the loving thing because you'd be leaving everything in order and the way you want it to be, as opposed to having to put the family through the process of going through paperwork, bureaucracy, searching and hunting for things that they need. It'd all be there. So if someone wants this financial inventory, how do we get it?
Well, you can feel free to call me and my team, the Farwell Group, at 416-863-7501. 416-863-7501. You can ask for a financial inventory and it can be sent out to you. And if you want someone to walk you through it, Darren and the Farwell Group are happy to do that as well. It's never too late to plan for a better outcome. Be happy that you prepare in advance. Your family will thank you for it, and you'll have peace of mind. Regardless of when it's used, it will be useful. Thank you, Darren. I look forward to learning more next week. I believe that Leslie's in next week. That's right. Good to be here as always, Marilyn.
Thank you. So it's a financial inventory. It's yours for the asking, and I'll give you the number one more time, 416-863-7501. I'm Marilyn Weston. You're definitely getting it straight from a woman's perspective right here on Zoomer Radio.